Welcome to the Silicon Slopes podcast. I'm here with Kaitlin Eskelson, who is the president and CEO of Visit Salt Lake. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Good.
We're just having some good conversations. You live up in Camas,
I do.
so you like the urban setting, but you also need to get away.
I do. I call it the juxtaposition that I really enjoy. So
I'm kind of jealous of that.
Yeah.
Juxtaposition. Very good. Let's start out with what is Visit Salt Lake?
So Visit Salt Lake is a 501c6 organization. We are tasked with bringing overnight visitors into Salt Lake County. So we are based inside the Salt Palace Convention Center. One of our primary roles is filling that convention center with business, but also pushing it around to the entire county, including our ski resorts, West Valley, South Valley, everywhere in between. So that's what we do.
Gotcha. And does that include the Southtown or the Mountain America?
It does. Mountain America Expo Center.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And we obviously are familiar with the Salt Palace. We host one event there, but you guys are like constantly with the events, right? It's weekly.
It is weekly, during the non-COVID times. It's multiple times a week. There's a lot moving in and out of that facility every day.
And it's all sorts of stuff. It's like business conventions, hunting expos.
Yes, there is an association for everything.
Yep.
So sometimes it will surprise you, like, wow, they can have an association and, in a large meeting like that. But the answer is yes. So yeah, everything from, large associations, large conventions, all the way down to smaller meetings, and then, board meetings, holiday parties, everything in between. So
Yeah. So you said overnight visitors, so that seems to be the key.
yeah,
Because that means hotels and
Correct.
restaurants like dinner, breakfast, lunch, right?
correct.
And that means more money for these local businesses and hotels.
Yeah, yep,
And
yep.
kind of trickles
So-
down from there.
It does. I mean, so, essentially we can kind of do all these economic impact studies as, everyone loves data. And I think what we can say for our delegates is they spend approximately an average of $972. So when you take that and put the multiplier effect on top of it, it's pretty big business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of these big ones bring in tens of thousands of people from all over the world, right?
Yeah. Yep, that's correct. So we, in Utah, we have a lot of multi-level marketing companies. You've got your Young Living and doTERRA and a lot of those. They have a huge global reach that, come into the Salt Palace, but there's also many other conventions that pull from a national crowd. And it's big business.
Yeah. And so you guys have a couple of advantages. It's fairly easy to get to Salt Lake. It's a pretty city, not too big.
Right.
It's not Vegas or Nashville or Miami, but there's hiking and mountain biking and skiing. So what is the seasonality of it?
Yeah. So, convention business is bigger in the warmer months. That's just the flow of it. So I would say, from May through October is probably our busiest season, if you will. But there are a lot of conferences that are just on a different cadence and they prefer to meet in kind of their downtimes. So really, we're a fairly year-round business. And then, of course, in the times that we don't have conventions, that's when we're trying to kind of diversify and fill with transient travel, leisure visitors, smaller corporate groups, et cetera. So, yeah, so it's a year-round thing. I mean, I always like to think that, we're heading into the down season, we'll have a little bit more time on our hands. It's really never the case.
Yeah.
So.
And so who owns the Salt Palace? Is it Salt Lake
Salt Lake County. Mm-hmm.
Got it. And the Salt Palace was kind of rebuilt and refurbished for the Olympics, correct?
Yes. Yep. So it was rebuilt and refurbished. It was also expanded during the time that we were hosting the Outdoor Retailer Convention. So some people say that was the premise for it. I think it was, and we just needed a bigger center. We were finally getting to the point where for a long time we had a situation where our center was actually too big for what we could offer with hotel rooms. But now we have a convention hotel coming online, so we're sort of in that sweet spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the hotel is being built right on the Salt Palace, right? Like
It is. Yeah, it is.
southeast corner.
Yep, physically attached, 700 rooms. It's a Hyatt Regency, which is kind of that level we've got some really high quality hotels, but it's sort of a brand that we've not really had much of here. So I think it will open a lot more doors.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right. And then the role in the community is obviously bringing folks in from out of state and having them spend as much money as possible while they're here.
Absolutely. I think what people don't realize is that we call it the visitor economy, which is just a fancy word for, visitors that are coming in not from here. And really for Salt Lake County alone, it's about a $4.6 billion market. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
The good thing about visitors is that they come in and they spend their dollars and they leave. So really, when you look at the investment that we're putting in versus what we're getting out of it, it's significant for the state.
Yeah, very good ROI.
Yeah.
And depending on who you ask, that's exactly what people want, like come in and then leave, right?
Right.
Again, depending on who you ask.
Now, we do get a lot of people, I will say, the story, and I am one of them, where they come for vacation or they come for a convention or something, and then they just stay.
Yeah.
Or they move here, which is great.
Yeah. I mean, the vast majority of cities across the world don't have that same appeal, right?
Right.
But it's one thing to like walk out and see warehouses and industrial buildings versus like the Wasatch Mountains.
Right. I feel like their business travel when they come here, it's a little bit like a teaser, and they're kind of like, oh, well, what's in those mountains or what's over there? And, it's very beautiful. But I think it just kind of sparks their interest in wanting to come back. And I think what we find with people that come to Utah is as soon as they see it, they do fall in love.
Yeah.
And, that doesn't really happen until they see it in person.
Yeah. And then as far as like interacting with the businesses, it's mostly downtown Salt Lake in the way I envision it, but it's the entire county, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's the entire county. And I think what's interesting is sometimes people don't realize the scale and scope of what we do, which means that we're doing our job right because we're trying to attract people from out of state. So a lot of people from in-state don't even see, what we're doing from an advertising, promotional side of things or sales side. So, yeah.
And what's your coordination with these hotels and restaurants? Do you tell them like, hey, here's the schedule. We've got a lot of people coming in. Get some extra beef, or make sure you got your hotels. Like, how does that interaction go?
Yeah, so we actually have about 13 full-time sales directors that work these leads. And for people that are not familiar with conventions, they don't just happen overnight. Sometimes we have like a 6-year lead time on knowing they're coming. For the hotels, we are in the process from A to Z with actually contracting all of the room blocks on behalf or helping facilitate that. For the restaurants, it's a little bit different. They do have access to our convention calendar if they're members, so they can kind of plan on knowing what to expect when any given convention's in town. So similar to like Silicon Slopes or the Summit.
Yeah.
They know and expect you.
Yeah. And I've only seen it a little bit firsthand. We had a friend from Minnesota that they had an outdoor shoe company, long established, but they came in 8 or 9 years ago for outdoor retail and stayed at a hotel for 4 or 5 days. They had to eat 3 meals a day, I would assume. And you times that by a lot. So I would imagine that was a huge stimulus for downtown Salt Lake and even the periphery. But what's the biggest one nowadays for you guys?
So I would say, we don't as much have that. A lot of years, outdoor retailer kind of carried that flag, if you will. Our multi-level marketing companies are really big for us, bringing a global audience, obviously huge spenders when they come in. So I would say a lot of those. Other than that, we kind of depending on the year, we court various different associations that can be huge. We could have all the sheriffs in at one time that are, the Global Sheriffs Association kind of thing. So it just depends on the year. But it's very consistent that we do host groups, anywhere from 5 to 20,000.
Gotcha. And it's pretty easy. You land at the airport and you can be at the hotel in the Salt Palace 15, 20 minutes, right?
Right.
And the airport's brand new, and that I assume helps you guys as well.
It does. It definitely does. The airport being so close to downtown is, I think, a huge differentiator for us. We've also got that free tracks line that runs between the downtown and the airport. And And then there also will be another terminal coming online in 24. I think what's going to happen is you're going to start to see more long haul direct flights. There's talk of Korea, which would obviously open a huge feeder market for us.
Yeah.
So that's exciting.
Very, very exciting. All right. And then like a lot of other organizations, but I catch the drift that you used COVID to kind of rebrand and rethink things. Yep. Is that true?
It is. It is. So we, I came into my position March 16th of 2020. So it was literally the day of COVID. Yeah. And, I had already had it in the back of my mind that, hey, we need to really go through a deep dive on what Salt Lake is, Salt Lake County. And we did a lot of research, and it basically came to the fact that the perceptions of Salt Lake were really lagging behind the actuality of it. I think we're very diverse. We're very culturally diverse. We've got a lot of business happening here, obviously, especially in the tech sector. And so there's a lot of growth that's happening here, and we as locals know that. But a lot of people outside of Utah do not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's very interesting because we get that a little bit here of if they're a friend or a relationship where we've interacted enough and they ask what, in my opinion, is like dumb questions because the internet's existed for 25 years.
Right.
Can I get a drink in Utah? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Or tell me, is it really like this? Like, again, what are you talking about?
Right.
So obviously people don't take more than 2 minutes to actually research and figure it out. But I assume you run into that quite a bit, right? Like where smart people that have enough money to come to a convention are asking kind of weird and dumb questions.
Right. I mean, we have gotten that question a lot. And I think in the past, the way we've answered it is sort of, which is kind of the Utah way, being kind of apologetic, like, oh, well, it's not really like that, And I think what we've done with this new brand is we've just gone all in and saying, we're not being apologetic anymore. Like, we're going to embrace who we are, which is this awesome juxtaposition that our quality of life is amazing. We can be skiing on our lunch break if we wanted to. We can be biking, hiking, all of it. And that's why we live here. And it's an awesome place to live, and it's an awesome place to work and play. And I think just owning that, because that's an awesome message to be sending. I think just owning that, has really started to change those perceptions. And the alcohol conversation, in recent years doesn't really come up as much because it's like, we're a normal city. That's an expectation that you can get a drink or you can have a great meal or you can go see a live band. Those are all things that if we didn't have all that, we wouldn't be on the map.
Right.
So, yeah.
Exactly. And then, you still have the capital of the LDS Church is in Salt Lake City. What's the relationship? How do you work with that group?
So the LDS Church headquarters, and I'm kind of speaking about Temple Square generally, I always say you would never go to Rome and not visit the Vatican, exactly. Right? Like, it is an awesome place. It tells an awesome, history of Utah. The way the temple was built from the Cottonwood Canyons, the materials, all of it is really interesting. And I think it tells a huge story of this intersection at, the turn of the century where miners and railroad workers and the church, how we refer to it here, they all coexisted. And it's really interesting. And I think we just embrace that story because it is a part of who we are. It's a part of our DNA. And again, it's not really something we want to apologize for because it makes us interesting.
Oh, yeah.
So that's kind of how we work with them. And also the LDS Church is very involved in the community. They give back in a lot of ways. And I think there's reasons why our downtown is very safe and prospering. And, a lot of it is because the dollars that do flow into the community because they care.
Yeah. It's an interesting little city because, you've got, like you've said, a lot more access to bars and entertainment and diversity from not just skin color, but just point of view of how the world works or should work.
Right.
But it's fairly easygoing and it's not overly contentious and it's not bitter, really, in my opinion.
No, I think it brings a level of laid back, and that we're all just, very accepting of other people's views. And I really believe that. I mean, I think Salt Lake is a very accepting place. I think all of Utah, is really that way as well. And also that level of you don't have to be fancy here. You know, like you can just come as you are, and you can find your path and prosper. And I think obviously Silicon Slopes is just that. They all those tech companies came here and were built, and they love it for that reason.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. So how does a rebrand work for a 501c6? I assume it's a little bit slower than maybe a for-profit like tech startup, as an example.
Yeah. So I will say I've worked on the state government side, which is, very slow when you want to go through an RFP and all of that. So we did do an RFP for agency work. That took a little bit of time, but I would say other than that, probably not much longer. I think the one thing that adds an additional dynamic for us is that we've got a lot of stakeholders. So it was a lot of, engaging with every demographic to figure out their perception, how they feel, what they want out of it. You definitely have to bring in everyone to the table. And that's the complicated portion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not very fun, but once you're at the end of it, it's better.
What's crazy is that the brand that we landed on, which is this, west of conventional, and we've got this manifesto that really is filled with the juxtaposition that you can have here. What was awesome is that once we got served that idea up from our ad agency, everyone was pretty on board pretty quickly. So to me, that tells us that it's the right direction.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the manifesto is really cool. I won't read it, but people can go to your website and read it. It's funny and quirky and well written and well thought out.
Yeah.
And then, so you guys are, visit Salt Lake, and as you mentioned, it's the county of Salt Lake. And then there's an organization above you guys, the state of Utah, that wants people to come and spend money throughout the entire state. How do you work with them?
So we work really closely with them, especially on curating the more urban messaging, if you will. It's been funny because during COVID, I think we've had to even work more collaboratively together, just because we've all had budget cuts.
Yeah.
So we're trying to make more out of less. But we do work really collaboratively with them. The difference with the Office of Tourism is that their funding 100% really is to go to marketing, whereas we're tasked with the sales efforts of the convention center. And so it kind of provides us a larger reach, if you will, for them to tell our story nationwide when we don't have as much money to put toward marketing as they do.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. So you guys have 2 convention centers, right? Do you think with the Point of the Mountain, the prison site, would there be a need for a third? Or do you think 2 is good enough for?
Gosh, that's a good question. I mean, right now we do, we're never at max capacity anywhere. So there's always room to grow. I think that if we settle in, get this hotel built downtown, see how the Salt Palace is filling, seeing how, in our term, we call it compression of the hotels. Because a lot of what you gauge it by is how full the hotels are and what their rate is and their occupancy. So I think it's just doing an analysis of all of that. The Convention Center and the Mountain America Expo Center serve 2 very different purposes.
Yeah. The
Expo Center is more local shows like the home show and the, FitCon and, things like that.
Yep.
So it's hard to say because Utah also is growing very fast.
Yeah.
And I think there's going to be more and more need for public meeting spaces to be contracted out. And so it's kind of hard to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess it just depends on how many gun shows there are, right?
I know. I know.
Seems like every 2 weeks there's a new billboard for a new gun show traveling.
There is. And, it's interesting because even 10 years ago, when we look at the development that's happening kind of to the west of us, that wasn't there. And so suddenly there is a huge population to be served, kind of in this southwest quadrant of Salt Lake County or northern Utah County. So I think it's kind of TBD on how that growth pattern looks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
All right, as we escape the grips of COVID, hopefully, it's been a interesting year for travel, tourism, and convention folks at basically everything that you guys do. What are your goals and strategic vision for the next year and a half, 2 years?
Yeah. So, our goal is really to, again, kind of settle into some of that growth that's happening, figure out how we can attract larger conventions. I would like for us to be seen as what I call a tier 1 city. We're never going to be a New York City or a San Francisco, nor do I think we want to be. But I do think we want to attract that kind of talent, and that kind of traveler to come here because they spend more money. So I think there's, that piece of it all. I also think that you'll see us get back into bidding on larger events. And so right now we're in the process of bidding on the 2024 RNC convention. That's a huge deal for us.
Yeah.
We're bidding on the Winter Olympics, either in 2030 or 34, depending on what we would be awarded. I feel pretty confident that we'll get one or the other.
Yeah.
So I think it's just putting Salt Lake on the map in that larger sphere. My view is always that the more people we can get here to experience it as a leisure destination, it is sort of, I call it the front door to economic development. The more we'll see business relocating here, talent, and recruitment efforts, I think that will be easier as we kind of come into our own. And so that's kind of my plan for the next 5 or 10 years ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you've got your work cut out for you.
Yeah.
You joined on the day.
Yep.
But you've also joined for, an interesting 10-year, 20 years. I have no idea what your goals are personally, but it'll be an interesting 20, 30 years of how that all comes together.
Yeah.
Very cool. We've enjoyed our relationship with you guys and appreciate all that you do. And, it's fun to do that one big event. I don't want to do it every week like you guys have to.
Right. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't automate it.
No.
Nope. Maybe someday, but probably not.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. Thank you so much for taking the time to join the podcast today, and appreciate all you guys do.
Thank you.